Well, I'd like to welcome our audience today to our third edition of One Conversation, which is part of the One Auburn initiative. And today we have a very, very special guest. About a year ago, ironically enough, during the first ever State of the City, 6 individuals from our community received the first ever Mayor's Lamplighter Awards. And today we're very blessed and fortunate to have one of those award winners, Miss Cynthia Boyd, who just happens to be my former 5th grade teacher, which was 45 years ago.
She's been
an important person in our community for a long, long time. She spent 30 years teaching in the Auburn City Schools system. And Miss Boyd, I'm just honored that you're still speaking to me after putting up with me that 5th grade year. And thank you for being with us today.
Thank you for having me. I counted an honor that you thought enough of me to ask me to do this. And I'm happy to be here.
Well, we're proud to have you. For our audience today, Ms. Boyd, would you just kind of give a brief introduction of your career here in Auburn, when you moved here, and your teaching career?
Well, actually, I am an Auburn native. I was born in Tuskegee, but I lived in Auburn all of my life, except for the 4 years I went away to college. My mother was a nurse at Dr. Ben F. Thomas's office. And my dad was an insurance agent in Opelika, Alabama. I attended, at the time, it was Boykin Street Elementary School. And I then went on to J.F. Drake. And my last 2 years of high school, we were in the midst of freedom of choice as far as attending schools in certain grades. And so I and 3 of my other friends, who we called ourselves the Four Musketeers, opted to finish our high school career at Auburn High School, which was then only 2 years old. Auburn Junior High, but it was Auburn High then, and it was only 2 years old.
So, Ms. Boyd, what was it like to grow up in a segregated city of Auburn?
Well, our parents sheltered us, so we did not know that we were segregated. That was all we knew. We went to school with each other. We went to church with each other. We played with each other. And so it was not until the middle 1960s that we realized that we were segregated.
And when you realized that, what kind of impact did that have on you?
Well, not really an impact, because that was all we had known. We had not known another life. So it was not difficult for us. It was just something that we had no experience with, so we didn't have a frame of reference for it. We enjoyed what we did. We knew no other life, as I said, so we enjoyed the fun that we had. We enjoyed the church members that we knew. It was just a fun time. As I said, my parents sheltered me, and so I had a good life as far as I knew.
And so you and the Four Musketeers go to Auburn High School to finish your educational career here in the city of Auburn for your junior and senior years. What was that like?
Now, that was a different animal. Of course, the people who were my classmates were not accustomed to black faces, as we were not accustomed to white faces. And so even though we went to school together, there were some people who were friendly towards us, but there were others who were not. They never did anything overt, but it was just, had I not had the friends that I had, I probably would have been miserable. Just to give you an example, when we would go to the cafeteria for lunch, if one of us would sit at the table with one of those individuals, they would all get up from the table. And so we virtually had a table to ourselves, which we learned very quickly that we could all sit at a different table and eat lunch by ourselves and watch other people stand around the wall and eat their lunch.
Did you ever regret not staying at J.F. Drake and finishing your school time there?
I did not. That was something we look forward to. And I think in the end, it probably prepared me for my career in college. It prepared me for the career that I would have as an instructor in the Auburn City School system.
When you think about that time, are there still people that you went to high school with that you stay in contact with today?
Yes, there are some who still live here in Auburn that I see, not necessarily, we don't go to cocktails together, go to dinner together or breakfast, but if I see them in a location or a visit, we have a conversation. It's pleasant. I don't hold grudges against them because they were living the life that they had experienced, and so were we. It was just the time that we were in.
So you finish up at Auburn High School and you go to college and you come back to town and you become a school teacher. What drew you into the education profession?
Okay, as a child, we had to use our imagination because our toys and the internet and TV, so to say, did not really exist. And so in my yard at home, we had a house, and then there was acreage to my right, and it was filled with trees. Well, we would take the pine straw and we would build imaginary homes, imaginary schools. And so I would teach imaginary straw children, in afternoons. When I was at Fisk University in Nashville, Tennessee. We had an independent project for a year. Not a year, for a month. And at the time, Auburn City Schools was in the midst of integrated. And so I did my independent January project in Auburn. Dr. Wayne Teague was the superintendent. I came to visit him one day and told him what we were doing and asked if it would be possible. And he, of course, agreed, and I went to work in elementary school. Well, we did it 2 years in a row. The second year I came back and I talked to him, and he asked me what was I going to do after college, and I said, I don't know. He said, would you like a job teaching? I said, sure, why not? And so he said, well, because of my major, which was psychology, I could not go right into the classroom. So he said, well, you'll have to do a year to get your teaching certificate, and when you're close, call me and I'll give you a job. That was the nature of my first job interview. And it was the only interview I had for probably a good 15 to 20 years. So when I finished up with my teaching certificate, I called him and he asked me what grade did I want to teach. At first, I thought I wanted to teach first grade. Lord, am I glad that I did not. So he told me what positions he had open, and I said, well, I'll take the fifth grade position at Boyd. And the rest, as they say, is history.
Of course, for our audience, Dr. Teague is the father of recently retired Auburn Superintendent Karen Delano. I think, Ms. Boyd, they're the only father and daughter that have ever been superintendents in Auburn City Schools. And Dr. Teague really had an open mind and a big heart for making sure that the African American teachers, the Black students, felt comfortable in his system. Did he not?
He did. As I say, when I had a conversation with him, it was a very open, friendly conversation. He was talking about a 17 or 18-year-old having a conversation with the superintendent of the city school system. I had never met him before. I don't remember who was superintendent when I went off to college, but I do not believe he was the person. But I never met him before. We had a conversation the first time. We must have talked for an hour or two, just about life in general, about Auburn in general, what my view of Auburn was, and so forth. And then when I came back the second time, we had a continued conversation. He made sure that my introduction into the education field at Auburn was a smooth and easy transition.
So, Ms. Boyd, you finished up your high school career going to Auburn High. You went to an HBCU to college, and you come back and your hometown now has an integrated school system, and you're now teaching in a school that used to be the elementary school for our Black children, and now it's the elementary school for all of our children. What was that? What were those first couple of weeks like for you as a school teacher, and now the fully integrated Auburn City Schools?
And just let me say that elementary school was the same elementary school that I had attended. So they had done some renovations on the building, so it didn't look like it looked when I was there. But it was a different life, just because I was not accustomed to being a teacher, obviously. And you go into a classroom, they give you all of your teacher editions, and they give you your schedule and your list of students. And that's pretty much it. The rest you've got to figure out for yourself. Luckily, back in those days, the teacher editions, if you could read, you could teach, because everything that you needed to say was in the teacher edition. Mm-hmm. And so I started out that way. I was very nervous at first. And as I thought about it, I really was only about 7 years older than my students that first year. So I think they thought of me as a big sister. I can't remember ever having a problem with discipline, because my parents were strong disciplinarians. So when they said move, you didn't ask why, you just moved in the direction they told you. And so I adopted that attitude with the students that I taught. And as I look back on my career, I never had a problem with discipline as far as children were concerned. I said I need you to do this, and they did it. They never asked why. They never asked why me. Maybe one child did, and I said, well, because I said so. That's why. That's good enough for right now. But it was an interesting time. I was nervous my first year, very, very, very nervous, because I felt like I wasn't making any headway. Back then, we were an IGE school, individually guided education, and children were grouped according to their abilities. So we were 4th and 5th grade school. So you had children who were 4th grade, 5th grade age, but they may have been reading on a 1st grade reading level. And you took the philosophy behind IGE was that you took a child where he was and you carried him as far as he could go within that 9-month span of time. Well, needless to say, if you are, and I was lucky enough to have children who were reading on the 1st grade reading level in the 5th grade, and I was very dismayed because simple arithmetic told me that in 9 months they were not going to be reading on the 5th grade level. And I was very disturbed. I worked as hard as I could to do as many other things besides what was included in the curriculum to be sure that they had a fair fight as they moved on, because I realized that as they progressed to Drake, which was a 6th grade school, certain skills and abilities were going to be required of them, expected of them, and I had to get them as close to that as I possibly could, even though they were reading so far behind grade. And let me just say that their reading was 1st grade, but their English and their spelling was 5th grade. English spelling was 5th grade. Science and social studies was 5th grade. The only other thing that was graded, was leveled, was their math. So here you are with a child who can barely read, and you've got to get him through the social studies text. You've got to get him through the math text. He's got to have the same spelling words as every other 5th grader. It was a daunting task. It was a daunting task.
And so those stresses that come with being a new teacher, that come with being challenged with students and they're trying to get them up to speed, did race play any part of adding extra stress to these challenges?
Not consciously. All I saw were students at this level, and I needed to get them to the level that they could function in 6th grade. And so I didn't care if they were polka dot or had stripes. As long as they could get to where I needed them to be by the end of the year with love and care, I was happy. I tried to treat everybody the same. As I said, I didn't care what you had, what you were, where you came from. As long as you could do what I needed you to do so that you could function, I was happy.
How was your interaction with parents? We all know that parents are very protective of their children. Most parents are not sure that their children make many mistakes. And so the challenge of a young African-American teacher dealing with particularly, I guess, a white parent who's trying to figure out why their kid's struggling in your class. What were those interchanges like?
And you know that's a long time ago, Mr.
Yes.
Andrews. And I can't rightly remember. Back then we basically only had parent conferences toward the end of the year, unless the child was really doing badly. We only had parent conferences we may have had it at the end of the 9 weeks, but we only had them at the end of the year. So there really wasn't a struggle, or there wasn't a conversation with parents. Unless a parent had a question, there really wasn't a conversation with them. As we moved out of IGE into, I won't say more formal education, but into more, I don't think Auburn City Schools has ever had what you would call a traditional outlook on education. We always stayed graded in some kind of way, but I got promoted after about 4 or 5 years, and I began to teach students who were reading on and above grade level. In fact, probably my last 15 or 20 years, I had children who read above grade level in reading, and that was my joy, because I always felt like I didn't really care what color you were or what nationality you were. That if you were an intelligent person, you could read and work to your ability. And so I always tried to push, always. And I did have parents who said, they didn't think their child was ready for me, because they didn't say I expected too much, but they said my expectations were high. And my philosophy always was, if you don't expect anything, you don't get anything. And when you have reached perfection, it is time for someone to put dirt on you because you are now no longer living. And so I tried always to push them as far as they could go, further than they thought they could go. And they always met my challenge. They never said we can't do this. They never said I don't want to do this. They never asked why are we doing this. I tried to explain from the beginning why, and they did. I was always surprised and pleased and happy with what they did.
Ms. Boyd, when you look at those kids in those early years, Auburn had just, as we said, just integrated its school system. Did you ever sense that the children were struggling with being in classrooms with mixed races?
I did not. Back in those days, the kids got along with each other. They played together. Auburn has always had a very good sports program for children. And so children, they were on baseball teams together. Basically, that was it. The girls were kind of left out. There was always a baseball team for a boy kids team. Girls were not necessarily as fortunate, but the kids played together. They went out to recess. They played together. If they fought, they did not necessarily fight along racial lines. They may have fought along girl-boy lines or girl-girl lines, but I won't say never, but rarely was it along racial lines. I can remember one time a child being upset because he said, I had two children studying together, and this child called me over. He said, Miss Boyd, he called me the N-word. And I said, what did he say? And the child said to me, I used the name for what he is. I used the word Negro. The child to whom he was speaking had never heard that word to describe himself. And so I explained to him what was going on. And I said, now, if you did say something like that, we don't have to have a meeting of the minds. But from what you have told me, he is just using the proper name for what we are. And once he understood that, he was fine. They never crossed words again. They were the best of friends. And I don't know. Nobody tolerated that kind of thing. I certainly didn't. You couldn't call anybody anything. My philosophy was, parents struggle hard enough for 9 months to figure out a name for their child. When the child actually gets here, the least we can do is call them by the name their parents would give them.
Ms. Boyd, you started in 73, you finished in 2003, and now it's 2020. When you look at Auburn City Schools and our city, do you think we've come a long ways since those years in the 60s when we had to push so hard to integrate our schools and bring our Black community and our white community to understand that we all lived in the same community and we should work together? I mean, what are your reflections on all your life here in this town?
Auburn City Schools is a very progressive school district. And I'll put the kids in Auburn City Schools up against kids anywhere. And I've said that countless times to my friends all over the world. But I think that, I don't know, there was so much of a conscious effort. It just seemed to happen. People just got along. Now, that things may have deteriorated over the years. But initially, I think there was such a push to be sure that the children respected and got along with each other, that it really wasn't an issue. I can't recall ever having to say anything to anybody about what they called someone or said to someone that would be considered a racial slur, either way.
You were one of the four Musketeers who were some of the early, were you part of the first group of Black students to graduate from Auburn High School?
No, we were the second group. The first, back, and as a child, sometimes things are murky in your mind. But as I recall, there were 4 grades that had freedom of choice.
Okay.
And I want to say second grade, 2 elementary schools and 2 high schools, 7 and 11. I know were the high schools. So in the 11th grade, I had the choice to go to Auburn High. And as I say, there were some challenging times. We had a teacher who, rest her soul now. We sat in alphabetical order, and I was a B, so I was always near the front. And when she would lecture and ask a question, and we would raise our hands, if she would ask all the other children first, and if none of those children knew the answer, then she would call. That was probably the most that I ever experienced, and it was like that constant. After a while, you get accustomed to it. And so you either just raise your hand and wait on none of them to know the answer, or you don't raise your hand. And typically, as teachers would do, if you don't raise your hand, that's the time that they call on. But that probably was the worst thing that I can think of in those 2 years.
Well, so you were one of the first Black children to graduate from Auburn High. My guess is you were one of the early group of teachers who were African American that were working in the Auburn City Schools system. Do you see yourself as a pioneer or a special part of our community's history?
I really don't. I see myself as a teacher who wanted the best for her students and wanted the students to perform at the very best level that they could perform at. I know you're not supposed to end sentences with prepositions, so just pretend that I didn't say that. But my goal was always for them to be the best. It wasn't me. There is no I in team. It was for them to be the best that they could be. Whatever it took to get them to be the best that they could be, that was my goal.
Well, Ms. Boyd, thank you for your time. I know you have somewhere else to be this afternoon. I want my audience, the people who are listening to this today, to understand what a special and unique person you are. And that from where I sit here 45 years later, after sitting in your classroom every day, I think you're one of the most influential people in my life, and I love you. And I appreciate everything that you've meant to me and to my community and to all the generations of kids that you've taught here in Auburn. Thank you.
You're very kind. Thank you for the opportunity to have my say.
You have a good afternoon.
You as well.
And thank you for joining One Conversation as part of One Auburn. And we will we'll have another conversation in the month of December. Thank you.